So let's talk about starting an army of Space Wolves for Rostam the Allfather, with some ideas for collecting the faction in Warhammer 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Wolves, and in this video I thought we'd do an overview of collecting the army for Warhammer 40k, some of the biggest reasons why you might want to collect an army, and what to expect for the Wolves in terms of lore models and gameplay, a few ideas and thoughts for planning out a force, a look at the Space Wolves and Space Marine discount kits and weighing up a few of the options, talking about ways that you can expand the force, and then cover a few game rules and one example themed army list. Loads to talk about, so let's jump straight into it. The Space Wolves are of course one of the 18 known legions of Space Marines, with their successors being the chapter that exists in Warhammer 40k. Initially the 6th Legion, these guys have a big Nordic and Viking theme going on, runic weapons and shields, often draped in furs, and fighting alongside wolves of various descriptions, whether they're hunting wolves or the mighty Thunderwolf cavalry. Their legion purpose was reportedly to serve as the Emperor's executioners, which they did their job almost too well with their assault on Prospero of the Thousand Sons, though in general with their actions in 40k they tend to be rather refreshing, not afraid to stand against the Imperial bureaucracy when they're making mistakes, something that's often led to outright conflicts with the Inquisition, tend to be a little bit more humanitarian than most chapters, and perhaps have a slightly more laid-back attitude than some, enjoying the fight and having a sense of humour. The homeworld of Fenris is a backdrop for some great sagas and epic deeds, lots of fearsome native fauna to test out their skill against. Their fortress monastery of the Fang is based there. They're the sons of Leman Ross, their bombastic and mighty Primarch. He disappeared on a great quest post-heresy with his Wolf Guard. It's believed that he'll be returned for the final battle at Wolf Time. The Battle Brothers are afflicted by the Canis Helix, which means they can often exhibit distinct wolf-like traits as they quite literally grow longer in the tooth, some elongated fangs and savage fighting, some to the point where they become devolved and get afflicted by the curse of the Wolfen. In battle they generally tend to have a preference for close combat, might make war with shields and axes and powerful frost weapons, and don't pay heed to the Codex Astartes, preferring to go their own way. For their miniature range, in general they're in a pretty good place right now. Their range refresh for 10th edition has been a pretty well received one, with a bunch of really nice models coming out, and both in terms of quantity and quality they seem to have done rather well when compared with some of the other more divergent chapters. They now have a medium-sized range of unique units, plus a Dreadnought kit, I think 7 or 8 squads and 7 or 8 unique character sculpts. A few of those are still Firstborn style ones, so maybe have some sort of chance of being rotated out. Though recently they did have quite a lot of units sent to Warhammer Legends, and unfortunately didn't make the jump into the Codex, so there'll be far less rule support for things like the Stormwolf aircraft, which was maybe one of the biggest casualties. On top of their unique stuff though, which is at least a fairly good range already, they've got access to the enormous Primaris Space Marine range, the biggest and most frequently updated army out there. They've got options to fill just about any battlefield role. If you're looking for other themed things as well, there's some further themed units and upgrades from the Horus Heresy range if desired, plus you can always take a look at 3D printing. Talking through their miniature range, they've got multiple sets of troops, Bloodclaws and Grey Hunters, somewhat standard Primaris with a few changes. The Bloodclaws are young berserkers, the Grey Hunters the seasoned veterans, all very long in the tooth. For their elites, they've got 2 flavours of Wolfguard, the Wolfguard Head Takers fighting with axes and shields, and the indomitable Wolfguard Terminators teleporting in their mighty tactical Dreadnought armour. They've got plenty of named special characters. Logan Grimnar himself has been a particularly well-received model reveal. The Great Wolf upscaled in nice Terminator armour. Arjak Rockfist is his champion. A Ragnar Blackmane, a mighty Wolf Lord fighting with his relic chainsword Frostfang. For a couple of the units that weren't updated, there's the Thunderwolf Cavalry and the Devolved Wolfen. The slight madness of Space Wolves riding wolves into battle has been pretty fun for many. The Wolfen kit does divide opinions as to its look though. I can't help but think they'd probably do a better job with a second go at that. And they have other things as well, such as their flexible Dreadnought kits that can build beyond the fell-handed, and their Firstborn Iron Priest is a pretty cool miniature in my opinion. They can of course use the entire Space Marine range though, everything from standard intercessors to specialist kit like the Invicta Tactical Warsuit. This would also be where you can find some big firepower to back up the Space Wolves with things like Repulsor Executioners, or some stompy and indomitable Redemptor Dreadnoughts. These aren't anywhere near as themed as the previous options, though they can certainly be made more so with a snazzy paint scheme and maybe a few parts taken from other kits or 3D printed bits. As mentioned, their Heresy range has some fun stuff as well. They've got a different take on the Wolfguard, and the character sculpts for the Horus Heresy range often tend to be pretty cool. I really quite like this Stormseer console on the bottom right here. He could make a pretty great Rune Priest for 40k. All of these tend to be unusually expensive though in Forge World resin. They have a sculpt for Leman Russ himself in the Horus Heresy, and there's certainly a very strong potential they might release a model for him in Warhammer 40k as well. It's probably odds on to be the next Loyalist Primarch that they bring back, but who knows. At least some chance he could be in the End Edition campaign for 10th edition. His Heresy era sculpt is quite a nice one though, I think. As mentioned as well, there's plenty of 3D printing creators that can make some themed bits for your power armoured space Vikings. I'm particularly familiar with Greytide Studios range, as they've sponsored videos on the channel in the past. I'll talk through their stuff later, though probably my single favourite thing is their ancient armour, which can make a cool upgrade for the Redemptor Dreadnought, as will be linked in the video description. In general, price-wise in Warhammer 40k, Space Marines and Space Wolves tend to probably be cheaper than most, though as ever might depend a bit on how you collect the army, whether you go for the most expensive stuff or try and economise a bit. Space Marines and Space Wolves do generally tend to be served by really quite a lot of discount deals, and being a fairly elite army, often with a lot of points in each box they sell you, doesn't hurt. Certainly if hoovering up the best deals that come out for both Space Marines and Space Wolves over the years, they'll be far cheaper to collect than certain armies out there in the game. Finally, for gameplay, their rules are between Codex Space Marines and Space Wolves. I'll talk about the rule sources later, but in general the way that they play tends to be brutal melee might, often with a lot of heroes and champions to lead them into battle. For things that happen in their codex, their unique units tend to move a little bit faster than the average Space Marines for some reason, or very eager to get to battle, I'm sure. Lots of their unique stuff tends to be at least fairly sturdy for the points, lots of infantry with either mass power armoured bodies or some storm shields. They have Oath of Moment as the core Space Marine rule to allow you to punch one unit extra hard with some big rerolls, and then in their codex they've got 3 unique themed attachments, and all will generally do a pretty good job for fighting melee units led by characters in various different flavours. These have some fairly on-theme saga mechanics, where you've got the option to do a quest and then your core detachment rule gets better. They can use any detachment in core Codex Space Marines though, maybe Gladius and Stormlance being the most relevant. Stormlance Task Force gives you a bunch of benefits towards the mounted keyword, and that's particularly nice for Thunderwolf Cavalry. For their power in game at the moment, at time of recording it's currently very early days after their Codex has come out. From the initial rules and what we know of their points though, they do look like they're going to be solidly playable. They don't strike me as an army that's going to enter into Warhammer 40k as a weak army, though whether or not they're going to break the meta or anything remains to be seen. Either way though, I really wouldn't focus too much on current in-game power. It changes all the time in Warhammer 40k, and there's a pretty reasonable chance by the time that you've collected an army, if they're overpowered or underpowered, things might have evened out. In any case, if you like the idea of an honourable army of Space Vikings charging across the battlefield to cut down their foes in glorious combat, the Space Wolves might well be for you. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Titan's Terrain. If you want a battlefield for your Space Wolves to go crusading across, they've got a few options. With an interesting terrain system that aims to do a few things differently, does have some trade-offs, but does have a fair few benefits. The idea behind their stuff is that it's sort of pop-up cardboard terrain. You have a grid system where you've got 12 tiles laid out 3x4. That makes a 45 by 60 inch battlefield the right size for 40k. Each square unfolds and then up pops the building. So you basically have an entire battlefield that can be stored completely flat, doesn't need any hobby effort to get nice, and of course is far cheaper than Games Workshop's terrain offerings. It definitely does have some big trade-offs, and I'll talk about those at the end of the video, but it certainly does well with the ease of storage and transport if your space is limited or you want to take it round to a friend's house or something. In any case, if you'd like to take a look over their stuff, you can find it links down in the video description, and I'll cycle back to it at the end of the video if you're interested. They've got a few different table designs with their own themes, and in any case a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. In any case, if you do decide to go with a Space Wolves army, there's a few things that you could potentially look into planning an army if you'd like. Just a few things to think about that might shape the way that you choose to jump into them. To find out a bit more about the army and the faction in general, Codex Space Marines and the Space Wolves supplement book to it. That'll get you all the lore, pretty pictures, and unit profiles for both armies. That's the official rule source from Games Workshop, and you could use those to unlock the content in the Warhammer 40k app. Rules are available elsewhere though, New Recruit and Warhapedia when they update, and they could be good places for points costs and messing around with army lists. You can always try armies before you buy them or jump into them, maybe with Tabletop Simulator or proxying models, and of course there's an absolute ton of things on YouTube. I've made a Space Wolf Codex overview. I'll aim to do a few more videos on the Space Wolves, certainly a unit tier list and a roundup of army lists in the near future. There's masses more out there on YouTube though, battle reports, painting guides and all sorts of lore videos. Just searching the Space Wolves should give you a whole bunch of stuff to go at if you want to immerse yourself in their things. It can also be nice to follow along with them on social media as well, perhaps joining Space Wolf Discord servers, Facebook pages or subreddits. They can all be some good places to get some painting inspiration or ask some basic questions to current collectors of the army. From a quick Google it seems there's a few different Space Wolf Discord servers. I've heard names like the Fang, the Rout and the 8. You could also think about planning a rough army list before you start to acquire loads of models as well. Maybe just using New Recruit or adding up a rough 1,000 point or 2,000 point army list just to get a rough idea as to how a Space Wolf force might fit together. And it could help you think about which units you might want to get earlier or pass up. It might also help you with thinking what sort of Space Wolf army you want to wind up with when you're building up a force of them. In general, most people tend to build somewhat balanced, gradually picking up units they like the look and feel of, maybe with some slant towards being usable on the tabletop, or just models that they find particularly nice looking. Typically, Space Wolf collectors will tend to go heaviest on their unique units, but then likely also have some generic Space Marine things to support the ones that appeal to them most. You could decide to collect armies of just one given theme though. Say going very heavy on elites like Wolfguard and Terminators and doing a sort of Champions of Fenris style Great Company list. I've seen people collect entire armies of Space Wolf Dreadnoughts, or you could even do a somewhat Horde style Space Marine list if you wanted to, particularly with Bloodclaws being cheap. Otherwise, you could theme your army to one of the detachments, maybe being sure to take loads of character data sheets for Saga of the Bold, or fielding the units that make most sense and get most synergies from the Saga of the Beast Slayer perhaps. You could just completely optimise for gameplay and follow along with competitive lists, and try and gradually build towards the strongest Space Wolf armies out there, though that can change quite a lot. Or you could go entirely lore driven, maybe theming an army around a named Great Company, having an appropriate Wolf Lord to lead them, or even a Space Wolf successor chapter like the Wolf Spear. I guess Space Wolves aren't particularly well known to get along with Imperial agents like the Inquisition, but they'd still be an option for allies. Maybe something like an Allied Knight could also be another way to expand an army if you'd like. I feel like I've seen a fair few Imperial Knights with 3D printed wolf heads and things like that to tie in a bit better with the theme of the army. Early on in the whole process as well, it's worth thinking about painting up a test model, perhaps most likely a Grey Hunter, Bloodclaw, Intercessor or Assault Intercessor as a good place to start, or perhaps even an Infernus Marine if you find them going cheap, given the starter sets in 10th edition. There's plenty of great painting guides for the Space Wolves that have built up over the years, plenty from Games Workshop themselves, though also loads from other content creators on YouTube and all sorts of other places on the internet. There's several ways that you could execute their sort of blue-grey style colour scheme. Some people skew really heavily towards the grey, and some more towards the sky blue side of things. As mentioned, you could do a Wolf Spear style design or a different successor chapter of your own creation if you'd want to go for something completely different. Space Wolves have got plenty of heraldry type things going on as well. Often people quite enjoy having some sculpted shoulder pads, either via upgrade sprues, 3D printing, or transfers. And you could go in for one themed Great Company heraldry as well. They have their own colour schemes, and there's a few heraldry guides that you can find out there online by searching. And it looks like there's quite a lot of representation for that on the new Space Wolf transfer sheet. Here's that sheet with a few different sections for the various different Great Companies there. Cool to see armies such as the Spirit Wolves, the Death Wolves and the Blood Moors all represented, plus some vehicle transfers. Here's the heraldry of the Wolf Spear chapter as well. And as mentioned, it's a big galaxy, and you could certainly make your own, even if Space Wolves aren't particularly known for having loads of successor chapters. Let's get on to the actual miniatures and units themselves though. And at the moment, from a jumping in point, I'd be most tempted to start either with the 10th edition launch army set, or perhaps the upcoming Space Wolves Combat Patrol. There's plenty of other solid options for other Space Marine discount sets, out and about as well of course. There's the starter set for Combat Patrol Space Marines, or one of the other Combat Patrols, or the Vanguard Spearhead. Some of those are generic options, or perhaps otherwise if just wanting to dip a toe in the faction, maybe something like a box of Grey Hunters perhaps, or perhaps some Wolfguard Head Takers if you just want some themed models to paint up some of before you actually take the plunge and get more if you want to. This is the contents of the updated Space Wolves Combat Patrol, which is currently pending release at time of recording, the price most likely being £100, $170 or €130, as that's what all the rest cost. In general, this one went down rather well. There's the commander in the Wolfguard Battle Leader, who's quite a fun kit, a nice themed character with plenty of options, a squad of Wolfguard Terminators, they're fighting elite with some big damage weapons and high saves, a squad of Bloodclaws, the young impetuous Space Wolves, that have a whole bunch of chainsaw attacks, and then a squad of the Savage Devolved Wolfen, who can move pretty fast and hit hard, though are maybe hard to control. It seems that the points in the box is going to be somewhere around 470 points, which really isn't too bad for a Combat Patrol box in 40k. Savings look like they're around about 27% versus what the kits will cost separately, which I wouldn't say a standout for 40k discount sets, but still really quite helpful, and given the unit mix in here, it definitely seems like a very, very helpful box set. Most of the models here are new miniatures, and have generally gone down quite well. The Wolfen ones are older, and as mentioned, they've had a more mixed reception. Some people really like their aesthetic, though some people don't. I feel like they may be in the right ratio here though, with a firm focus on the more standard Space Wolves. It does feel like the sort of box set that in time you could potentially either get two of, or pair with the army set. If pairing with the army set, I guess you'd have multiple copies of the Bloodclaws and the Battle Leader, neither of which feel terrible to have in multiples to me, as perhaps the most generic troops and character choice in the Codex. Before moving on to talk about all the other kits, it's worth underlining the different places that you can buy 40k miniatures. Direct from Games Workshop's own Warhammer web store is usually the most reliable, but also usually the most expensive, whether it's new plastic kits or any others. The majority of people worldwide tend to buy new Warhammer models from discount retailers. Loads of examples out there, and you can just search discount Warhammer with your country name. Often there tend to be some pretty good options. I've got a whole bunch of them linked down in the video description for affiliate ones that I'd certainly personally recommend, and anything bought through those links also helps to support Auspex Tactics as well, without costing any more. In the UK there's Element Games for 15% off, though I do have plenty of other UK ones linked alongside. For Australia there's Gap Games for 21% off. For Canada there's Fenris Workshop with 10, for Wargame Portal in the USA there's 15, and then for Taschengeldieb in Germany in the EU there's 16% off. A big thank you to anyone picking up stuff via those links, it does help to support Auspex Tactics. New plastic kits isn't the only option for getting Warhammer models on the table though. Location dependent, the second-hand markets can also be well worth a look. Space Wolves and Space Marines in general tend to have a lot of people reselling armies of them. Quality can be kind of variable with pre-owned miniatures, though plenty of them, provided they're not painted too thickly, can be absolutely fine quality-wise, can potentially save a lot of money and potentially even time and effort. Otherwise, certainly for more recent Warhammer, 3D printing and third-party manufacturers also exist as well. Lots of great alternative sculpts exist, and it can be cool to have options outside of Games Workshop, themed weapons inlaid with runes, maybe some chapter iconography with some wolf head type things. There's certainly a whole ton of options out there, either from print on demand or picking up STLs. I mentioned the bits and parts from Greytide Studios. They've sponsored some videos in the channel on the past, so I'm quite familiar with their fairly popular Primal Hounds range. They have a whole bunch of bits that are compatible with Games Workshop miniatures. If you've got a 3D printer, you can pick up their STLs. There's plenty of places that you can pick them up around the world and then have them posted to you print on demand. I'll leave the links to them down in the video description. In the USA there's Wargame Portal, in the rest of the world there's bits packs from Only Games. In my opinion they've got really quite a bunch of cool stuff. Themed backpacks and pauldrons, winged North-style helms. The shields tend to be quite popular. As mentioned, there's that ancient armour that could do for dreadnoughts. There's some nice jetpacks for jump troops out there. The capes are quite popular as well. But otherwise, just feel free to check out the links in the video description. If you want to take a look over their range, the ones down there help to support the channel once again as affiliate links, that they're available elsewhere too. There's plenty of other great 3D printing creators out there, of course. Otherwise, the other big Space Wolves box set for 10th edition is the Space Wolves Army set. Released and priced at £145, $230 and €180. It hasn't been so long since launch day at time of recording. This one has the Wolf Priest and the Wolf Guard Battle Leader, 10 Blood Claws, and then 10 of the more tactical Marine style Grey Hunters, and then 3 of the Wolf Guard Head Takers with their hunting wolves, plus the Codex and data cards. For the points in the box, it's around about 570 points or so. Not quite so standout there due to the paper and rules content, though including those the discount is still pretty respectable, around about 33% off or so. If it were possible to get this for the price Games Workshop wanted to sell it for, and particularly at discount, it does seem like a good intro to the faction. Both of the battle line troops, 2 out of the 3 generic characters, and some fighting elites, though unfortunately even just after it's come out it's already sold out in a whole bunch of places. In Australia and New Zealand it looks like there's better supply, but in the UK, EU, US and Canada it seems it's already sold out in Games Workshop's web store unless they rustle up more stock. Your best bet would be to try various different discount retailers out there, though it might not be around for too much longer. Element Games seems to have some at £145 in the UK, unfortunately not at discount there. Probably because it's a second wave order with the margins lower, and feel free to give a shout out. And Taschengeldieb seems to have some stock of them at both English and German at discount in the EU, also linked in the video description. Certainly a bit frustrating for people who missed out on this one though. In the USA, supply seem to be particularly low. There will likely be a few more copies going out to physical brick and mortar Games Workshop stores, so that could potentially be another option to try and find them if there's one local to you. Otherwise though, beyond the more specifically themed Space Wolf miniatures, there's plenty of generic Space Marine discount sets. Combat Patrol Space Marines has some pretty cool stuff with some Terminators, Flamer Infernus Marines, an already Rune Priest looking Terminator Librarian, and a Terminator Captain. They're monopose miniatures, though nice enough ones in my opinion. Just the thing to do with this one is not to get it from the actual Space Marine Combat Patrol box, get it from the Space Marine starter set, which is directly cheaper and also comes with 3 Tyranids. Otherwise for options, there's the Vanguard Task Force. This one gets you really quite a lot of monopose Phobos Marines with Eliminators, Suppressors, Infiltrators and a Phobos Captain. Not too bad if you want some sneaky Space Marine Scouts, and again at least at somewhat good discount versus buying separately. The Dark Angels Combat Patrol could also be interesting enough for a clutch of more generic Primaris units. The discount isn't huge, but could be a somewhat helpful building block for just about any Space Marine army. You probably want something for the Gravis Captain to lead though. And there have been some past discount sets for Space Wolves. There's a good chance, at least at time of recording, you might be able to find copies of the previous Combat Patrol box about. This one's got Intercessors, a Tactical Warsuit, 5 Reavers, and a Battle Leader, mainly generic Primaris but with a couple of upgrade sprues. Generally it wasn't a particularly well liked box set, but nothing wrong with it if these particular combo of units appeal to you. Before talking through a few more specific units, I'll probably bear in mind a couple of things. For the firstborn models, things like the Wolfen, Bjorn the Fell-Handed and the Thunderwolf Cavalry, there's at least a reasonable chance that we might see updates or removals for them in 11th edition. Looks like they'll probably survive until then, but it does seem that Games Workshop's really moving into their final stages of phasing out firstborn Space Marines in 40k, when the Space Wolf Codex drops in 11th, which could be anywhere between around about 18 months to 3 years from now. There's at least a reasonable chance that these units either get Primaris replacement or just get dropped altogether. Though personally I'd guess that they'll get replaced rather than removed. It does mean it's maybe a bit on the frustrating side not to know what's happening with them, but just bear in mind that there's a potential time limit as to when they might get replaced. If you can get enough enjoyment out of them out of those 18 months to 3 years, then nothing wrong with picking them up. I just bear in mind that updates don't always necessarily transfer across from one kit to another super perfectly. It really depends on the unit and how they do it. The same also applies to the more generic firstborn Space Marine units as well, quite a lot of which are likely to be retired within a year or so with the launch of 11th edition 40k. Otherwise, with army expansion, in general I feel like Space Wolves players tend to focus on their unique units more so than other things, but it seems that the Codex does really want to underline that this time around. Games Workshop seem to have restricted quite a lot of rules and options to only work on Space Wolf units. The detachments seem to be about 50-50, things that can only be used on Space Wolf's unique things, and things that can be used on generic Astartes units. And it's a different approach to some of the other Divergent chapter codexes. It just means in those detachments, the more generic Primaris could be somewhat second-class Marines in terms of option support. Say standard intercessors will be locked out of certain stratagems, enhancements, and detachment rules. They won't be able to be joined by the unique Space Wolf characters like, say, the Wolfguard Battle Leader or Njal Stormcaller, and the same is true vice versa for the generic characters. It doesn't mean that they're not usable, and you could still use a core codex detachment at the moment, but it definitely seems to be Games Workshop giving you a further push towards their actual unique units as opposed to the generic stuff. Rules-wise though, it certainly has been interesting to take a look at the new profiles and detachment rules for Codex Space Wolves. Here are just a few of the units that feel a bit more standout from their unique stuff. The Blood Claws at 135 points seem pretty nice. That's just quite a cheap cost to pile a whole load of Space Marine bodies onto a mid-board objective with advance and charge. They'll outright delete lighter infantry units, won't be much threat against tougher stuff, but they should take a bit of effort to take down and have lots of objective control to take the point in the meantime. You could make them significantly scarier with an attached character if you wanted. The Wolfguard Head Takers though seem like maybe the optimal unit to give things like the Wolf Priest or the Wolfguard Battle Leader with certain enhancements to lead, given they actually have some serious melee threat with those mastercrafted power weapons. If taken in squads of 3 as well, 25 points for the Hunting Wolf unit seems like quite a nice little nuisance and screening squad. Thunderwolf Cavalry are reportedly 100 points for 3 of them in the digital points, and they just seem to have all around good stats for that cost, fairly fast moving at 12 inches, good defense with a 4+ invulnerable save and 4 wounds, and even though they lost character support in the codex, they've got some scary melee threats with a bunch of strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2 attacks that go up to a pretty brutal damage 3 on the charge. They just seem strong stats for the cost. Beyond the Fell-Handed looks like an interesting dreadnought, particularly with his command point generation making up a good chunk of his value. Ideally you want him to survive for the first turn or 2, but then after that he can be committed to the fight as a pretty sturdy dreadnought with his feel no pain and some big hitting melee. And then for the characters, perhaps some of the generic ones feel like they could be some of the most interesting. The Wolfguard Battle Leader is very cheap and has a nice melee buff with some sustained hits and reroll 1s to hit. Seems like it'd be hard for him to be a wrong choice with the unique units. He's got a nice fighty captain style stat line for the cost. Maybe a Thunderhammer and Storm Shield could be a nice loadout for him. Otherwise, weirdly enough, the Firstborn Iron Priest seems like a particularly scary model right now. Just because he's 60 points to give a vehicle rapid fire 1 with some scary anti-tank weapons, it means that you could basically have a Predator Annihilator firing with all the force of 2 Predator Annihilators if it's within 24 inches and he's nearby. Really quite scary stuff, and it's still very good with things like Gladiator Lancers or Repulsor Executioners too. Otherwise, for generic Space Marine units, there's lots of very effective stuff at time of recording. I feel like a unit or 2 of Scouts is really going to be a bad deal in an army. 70 points to infiltrate and claim the midfield. Jump Intercessors are a nice cheap fighter unit that can move fast, deep strike and do secondary objectives and still be plenty of threat. Space Wolves do melee well, but having just a couple of scary anti-tank threats as ranged units can add a lot to an army, Maybe some Gladiator Lancers or Vindicators could be okay. I'd probably lean Primaris at the moment though, given the uncertain state of Firstborn. And otherwise, some Infiltrators or Intercessors are really quite nice to claim a homeboard objective, and lots of people like to use a combi weapon Lieutenant, a nice skirmishy and hard to kill character from the Leviathan box. He's pretty solid for scoring. Finally, for shoutouts, for generic Primaris things, worth mentioning the Hellblasters. As Space Marines go, these are some of the most points that you can put on the table for the least amount of money. And on top of that, they're quite a nice beginner-friendly unit. Nice plasma weapons that can deal damage against just about anything that they fire at. And if you do happen to get them all killed in short order, at least they can fire on death. Maybe take a chunk out of something that was just about to deal you yet more damage. It's just kind of hard to go too far wrong with them. In general though, when expanding an army, there's always a lot of scope for just collecting what you like the look of in Warhammer 40k. Rules change over time, both with additions, codexes, and balance updates, though the models that you have will stay, and have even more reliability on that front with some of the newer sculpts that Games Workshop comes out with. At first impressions, pretty much most of the units seem at least usable. Some of them feel like they're going to be more powerhouse units to carry the army, some of which could fill a niche role in small numbers, though in general in 10th edition Games Workshop's been pretty good at keeping just about all units in the game at least usable in a casual setting, even if not everything is tournament optimised. My general idea would be to get enough things to be able to play small games pretty much right away, gradually paint up that small force, and then when you're done with that, gradually expand in leaps and bounds, getting a discount box or a kit or two at a time, getting those painted up, and expanding slowly and sustainably, rather than buying everything in one go and getting overwhelmed with a mountain of plastic. I probably have just some sort of rough idea for a 2,000 point army list that I was building towards, and then work towards that, playing games as you go and maybe adapting your plans as you learn more about the army and the game in general. And talking of the game, let's get on to the rules. The divergent chapters in Warhammer 40k tend to be at a bit of a disadvantage, at least in terms of money for the rules wise, at least going by the official sources needing both Codex Space Marines and the supplement book to function with all the units that they can take, so a higher cost to access the rules than normal. At the moment, I'd also bear in mind that Games Workshop seem to have some sort of generic Space Marine release build for later in 2025. There's a pretty reasonable chance they could do a second edition of the Codex later in 10th. Absolutely not guaranteed, of course, but probably something to bear in mind that there's just a small chance that it could be updated in short order, and probably would be with 11th edition fairly early on, if not then. In any case, though, it stands as the main rule source for the army. And then to support the physical books, there's a whole bunch of downloads to support them, which can be a fair bit to get your head around, though ultimately I still say it's better than Games Workshop asking you to pay for each one of these. There's the Minotaur and Field Manual, which will have the current points for the army. At time of recording for me, the Codex launch points aren't out, but it won't be long on that front. The Codex will have an errata document to correct any printing errors or more obvious things that Games Workshop got wrong. There's the Balanced Data Slate document, which you might find any major rules rebalances for the faction. A couple more detachments in the Champions of Fenris and Librarius Conclave, other things that the Space Wolves can feel found in the Grotmus detachment section online, and then also the Legends documents for Space Marines and Space Wolves, rule sets for casual gamers for fielding the units that Games Workshop has taken off sale and taken out of the Codex. When they update a whole bunch of things will go there, including datasheets like the Storm Wolf and Stormfang. There's also plenty of third-party sites that tend to host rules as well, such as Warhapedia and New Recruit for army construction. They can be other valuable tools once they update. For the more core and detachment rules for the Space Wolf Codex though, they use Oath and Moments like regular Space Marines, mark one unit and you get to re-roll the hit rolls against them, usually quite a big deal for anything hitting on a 3+, that's lots of extra damage there, can be useful for range and melee and applying pressure to a big tough unit. And then in the main codex there's 3 themed detachments, the Saga of the Bold, the Saga of the Beast Slayer and the Saga of the Hunter, though as mentioned you can use the core codex Space Marine detachments. The Stormlance one has often been popular for a Thunderwolf focus list, given loads of support for mounted units and some nice advance and charge things for other things too. For the Space Wolves unique ones though, the Saga of the Bold is the hero focused one. Character units gets to re-roll a dice whenever they make attacks, and then if you can achieve 3 of the 4 boasts in the detachment, then basically every unit in your army gets some big re-rolls, which is very nice. They've got some good melee support stratagems on top of that, but if you're taking this, you should probably load up on loads of scary units in melee led by characters. The Saga of the Beast Slayer might be my favourite one at first impressions. The theming is hunting down great beasts, monsters and war machines. You get lethal hits for all your units against enemy character, monster or vehicle datasheets, so a very direct damage buff against lots of scary stuff. And then if you can kill half or more of the enemy datasheets of that nature, then you get lethal hits against everything. On top of that, there's some very helpful stratagems, return to reserve, some big damage ones and reactive moves. Feels like quite a lot of good stuff there. And then finally there's the Saga of the Hunter. The idea being a wolf pack of space wolves working together to bring down the foe, +1 to hit if you've got multiple units mobbing up on the enemy or you outnumber the foe, and you also get a bonus of +1 to wound as well once you've killed a certain tally in close combat depending on the game size. The stratagems for this one generally tend to focus around sneaky melee tricks, manipulating the fight phase, and other things to counter the foe. Maybe feels like a little bit less raw power, but a bunch of interesting things that a skilled player could make lots of use of. To round up though, here's just one idea for a Rust themed army list for the Sons of Rust. The build for this one is to take the army set and the combat patrol box and the units that come inside it, use literally everything out of those, and then expand with a whole bunch of other units to hit 2,000 points. I went with the Saga of the Beast Slayer for this one. I feel like this would do well enough for the other detachments or gladiators potentially too. In any case, to use the characters, we've got the 2 Wolfguard battle leaders. I went for Thunderhammer and Storm Shield for those, and a Wolf Priest as well. I've then got 2 units of Wolfguard head takers, taking the Thunderhammers and Storm Shields. 1 Wolfguard battle leader and 1 Wolf Priest will attach to those, and then the other battle leader will join a unit of Grey Hunters, and they'll move for the mid-board to get a whole bunch of OC3 there, and then give the fighty battle leader 4 rerolls to wound hopefully. As well as that, there's 2 cheap units of Blood Claws, 135 points for 10 Marines, again to throw themselves onto the mid-board objective, hopefully flip it to your favour for a turn, and then give a sturdy unit for the enemy to take down. Lethal hits will make them a bit more general purpose if they happen to be fighting tough stuff. For a deep strike or rapid ingress style threat, we've got a unit of Wolfguard Terminators. I'll go for the Storm Shields with the power weapons, the Assault Cannon, and a great weapon on the Sergeant there, and they're joined by Arjak Rockfist to make the squad very general purpose against both lighter stuff and really tough things. They'll hopefully use rapid ingress to get themselves into the fight for a very short charge. There's then 2 units of Thunderwolf Cavalry, just really nice stats for the cost. A unit of Wolfmen with Storm Shields, which could be another option for an attached character. You could use the enhancement that allows a Wolfguard battle leader to go with them perhaps, but they're fairly fast, solid and fighty, and can even have some OC near characters. There's a unit of scouts to hold down the midfield. They've got some combat blades plus a missile launcher, and then finally for some big guns to worry the enemy tanks, we've got 2 gladiator lancers. Nice scary gun turrets. They can make a nasty mess of enemy big monsters and vehicles, and they're supported with an Iron Priest who can give rapid fire to their nasty laser destroyer, plus heal them a bit. I quite happily could have gone for Ballistus Dreadnoughts maybe as an alternative. They might be a touch more general purpose, if not quite as scary against tough stuff. Both their more Predator Annihilators would also get on really well with that Iron Priest. I wouldn't expect this one to be crazily tournament optimal or anything like that, but feels like it's got enough solid and scary options to hold its own with a bunch of armies, particularly if played well. In any case, I'll leave that one there for now. Space Wolves generals out there, feel free to give me any other insights as to how to go about collecting or playing the army in current 40k. And if you'd like something else Space Wolves to watch, then feel free to check out my Codex review. That'll be links down in the video description. As mentioned, I'll certainly aim to have some other Space Wolf videos coming, a tier list and some army list reviews, and maybe a few more unit reviews if I get a chance. So subscribe to Auspex Tactics or check back if you'd like to see that. Finally though, before I go, I'll just cycle back to Titan's Terrain, today's video sponsor, and as mentioned they're one option to get a board worth of 40k terrain on the table with their fold out cardboard terrain system. As mentioned for this one, I would say there's some pros and cons versus other terrain sets to put on the table. Maybe the biggest advantages being that they're really quite easy to store and transport due to the folding system. Most other stuff can't fold away quite this small, quite this easily. They're far cheaper than a whole board of Games Workshop terrain, or at least somewhat comparable to MDF, and they don't need any painting or assembly, being ready to go straight away, which is quite a big deal for people who don't have loads of spare time. For downsides, it is a bit less sturdy and hard wearing than plastic or MDF, given it's made of cardboard due to folding flat, and that does also mean that it might be hard to put models in the upper floors and things. The grid system could also be a weakness as well. You can get some flexibility with rotating the tiles a bit, but it still can create some firing lanes. Might not be the worst thing in the world just to have maybe a ruin or 2 extra to break those up, but in general I feel like it does well enough for more casual games of 40k. In any case, for their specific designs of them, they've got a Forgotten Furnace one, which is sort of like a Chaos Foundry style one, or glowing runes and burnt out factories. There's a more standard ruined city one called a Shattered Hive, bombed out buildings and armoured containers and the like. And then they've got a more verdant ruin set called an Overgrown Capital, ruins that could maybe apply to both futuristic or fantasy settings. Each of those also has an expansion centerpiece set as well, where you push 2 tiles together to make a great big building, a cathedral type thing for 2 of them, and then an infernal spire for the foundry one. In any case, feel free to check them out. There'll be links down in the video description if you want to take a look at their stuff. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one in any case. I'll leave that one there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to help support the channel, then feel free to check out the discount links in the video description or the channel's Patreon page. A massive thank you to anyone supporting there. It is the primary thing that keeps the videos coming. There's a few advantages for Patreon supporters, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, an automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.